Welcome to Watercolours with Caroline, and today we are going to be painting a chicken or a pair of chickens with a big thank you to Wendy for photographs of her Rhode Island red chickens that she has. Lost and found they are called. So I'm just giving a little demonstration of how to break down the chicken into triangles and very simple shapes, noticing the angle that the triangles come off at. You could do these lines in very light pencil lines before you start to draw your chicken, and that will help you. And also look at the height of the tail compared to the height of the head. And in this one, with the chicken facing a little bit away and the tail up, the tail is a little bit higher than the head. Some of the other photographs, it's about the same level. So I have edited out in my composition, I've taken out the wheelbarrow and just left a bluish green background. So here I am, I'm sketching in the triangle for the leg and the big triangle for the tail. And there's some little dark triangles at the front of the leg and the big triangle for the neck and the head and the wing. And once you get those very basic sketch shapes in, then you can start to put in your lines with more detail. And don't ever worry about your pencil line showing. I think it's really lovely to see pencil lines showing through your painting. They look attractive. I have a little tiny eraser to erase some of the marks that I don't want to show through, my construction lines and lines where I was planning my drawing. And I brush those away. Don't sweep them away with your hand, and make sure you get rid of them, because those little bits of eraser, if they get in your paint, they destroy the look of your paint, they destroy your wash. You don't want them stuck in there. So here are my mixes. I have burnt sienna is a big one, cadmium yellow or azo yellow, or aureolin yellow, and quinacridone gold. Beautiful, expensive color. Mine's by Core Paints, so quite expensive, but it's the perfect color for the underwash of the chicken. I'm going in with some cadmium red to brighten it up. I also have transparent orange by Core Paints. If my paints are not by Core, they're mostly by Winsor and Newton, which have always been my favorites. But since Golden started to make their watercolors, I really do like the rich colors that they have come out with. It's worth buying 2 or 3 beautiful colors in expensive paints. You don't use them very often, so they're going to last you a long time. I'm using what's called a thirsty brush to pick up some of the paint on the chest and the leg. I forgot to leave it a bit lighter there. In my original, this is the second one that I did, that area was much lighter. I'm using cadmium red to go in with the head and the comb and the wattle, and adding a little bit of cadmium red. The basic wash is still wet. I'm warming it up with some cadmium red in my more shadowy areas. And then with my thirsty brush, I'm pulling back a little of the color where I want it to stay light. And I'm using a slightly stronger brush to wash a little bit of that color back. Because it is I've used a lot of the quinacridone gold, it's quite a lot stronger than a cadmium yellow, so I had to use a Kleenex to dab a little bit of that off. Now, I want this to be completely dry before I go on to the next layer. I'm putting in some of the beautiful warm darks on the back of the chicken. This is a burnt sienna mixed with a little cadmium red. And my warm browns for the chicken are mostly burnt sienna with some transparent orange, or burnt sienna with cadmium red, or just burnt sienna on its own. Beautiful chicken color for these Rhode Island reds. Now, if you want a much darker brown, you can mix the burnt sienna with ultramarine blue, and even a little bit of rose or alizarin crimson will make it into a very dark, lovely dark brown. I'm putting in some of my dark values now so that I know where they are and I can judge how dark I want to go. And as you put in your darks, it will make your lights look much lighter. If you want your mixture to be darker, don't add so much water to your mixture. That's the trick with watercolor. is if you want a light wash, a light colour, mix lots of water in with your wash, or wet your paper first. I'm wetting this area that I want to keep light, and I would like some of the feathers from the shadow area to just blend wet in wet into that area rather than have a hard edge. Now the back side of the chicken is very light and fluffy, and I wet that so that it looks more soft when I put the wash of, this is burnt sienna with a little cadmium red, and a touch, sometimes just a touch of ultramarine blue to darken it down a little bit, or we say cool it down too. When you put a cool colour like a blue with a warm colour, we are cooling it down, making it fade into the shadows a little more. And again, I'm using that thirsty brush to pick up some of the paint in the areas that I want to keep soft and light. I'm doing the neck of the chicken with the burnt sienna, and there's quite a lot of light feathers on the back of the neck, and they catch the sun, so I want to leave them with the yellow and the gold showing through, and on the tail too. And it looks a little strange when you put it down on the dry paper to start with, but when you get all of your washes in and it's finished, it just looks realistic. And because these are studies that we're doing with these group of lessons, I want to have a more realistic look to them. I'm really trying to study myself how things are formed, what shapes and colours they are, where they reflect the light. And it's very difficult to do a more abstract painting if you don't understand these things. If you don't understand, you can do a little abstract chicken if you understand very carefully the shapes of everything, the colours of everything, where the light and shadow is. But you need to figure that all out first. So these studies we're doing for this group of lessons is really learning about those shapes, those shadows, the values in things. And look how different everything looks when I put in that really dark tail. And I've mixed ultramarine blue, a little bit maybe of phthalo blue, some burnt sienna, some cadmium red, and made a really dark mix to put the tail feathers in. Quite a lot of blue in that brown. And I also added to the comb and the wattles of the chicken, I added a little bit of permanent rose or alizarin crimson to just darken up the shadows on the red areas. A smaller brush to add more shadow, more detail around the tail and the wing. And I work that way. I start with my much bigger brush for the first washes, the looser washes, and then a medium brush as I get into more detail. And then I switch to a number 2, a very small brush for the detail, especially this little painting. It's only 4 inches by 6 inches, so I don't want to use a great big brush for that. I need to be careful. And the back of the leg has quite a lot of dark value on it, but I don't want it to blend wet in wet, so I'm doing that on dry paper, but I can soften the edge with a wet brush so it doesn't look quite so hard. The feathers are very soft, so I want that look to them. A little more detail on the neck and around the head. And maybe you noticed at the beginning, the eye is so tiny. I put that in with a little 01 Pigma pen, and the beak too, because I don't think my paintbrush is going to be small enough to get that little tiny detail. And there's no reason you can't use a pen to help accentuate some of the lines and some of the details in your painting. When it gets to this stage of the painting, you're looking at your photograph and you're judging your colors, your values, your detail, and you're just sort of doing a little bit at a time. I want a little bit more red on the chest, some raw sienna on the beak. I still have the legs to do. I'm going to use, when I get to them, I'm going to use raw sienna and a little bit of cobalt blue to cool it down on the legs. Very, very light though, lots of water for that. I want the legs to be nice and light. I'm getting into the real darks now. Same mix. I don't change the mix very much. It's still ultramarine blue with burnt sienna. but you just keep layering it on, less water with the mix. Popping those legs in now. The chicken's dry, and I'm putting on a very, very yellow wash for the grass. I've got mostly Azo Yellow in that wash, tiny touch of Cobalt Blue with that. Now I've mixed more Cobalt Blue for the background grass and even more Cobalt Blue. The blue next to the orange chicken, the orangey brown chicken, is going to be a complement. So you want the blue the grass to have a lot of the Cobalt Blue in close to the chicken. And now I've added some Ultramarine blue for shadows under the chicken. I want the yellow grass for the foreground so that it looks like lovely and bright, like a summer's day. But the Cobalt Bluey grass fades into the background and complements the orangey brown of the chicken. I'm using my Kleenex to just pull that leg back, the light colour on the leg. Got a little bit lost with my grass. Got carried away with my big brush, see? And you may say, why didn't you put the grass in first? Well, I could have done. But I find sometimes it's easier to make a colour judgment or a value judgment when your main part of the picture is completed. I want to complete that, see what values and colours I've used, and then use complements for the background. So if I'd have put my background in first, I may have done it too dark or too light, or the wrong colours. I may not have been thinking about the Cobalt Blue to complement the chicken. Now the background is dry, and you can see how it fades as it dries, and I'm using a little brush, a rigger brush, and a small, I think I've just got the rigger brush there, or a number 2. I'm making some grassy shapes and some shadows, and I get a little bit of water on my brush and just sort of move that about a little bit, make it a little bit loose in places. Gone to a more bluey green. I've added more Cobalt Blue to put some grass shade into the background. And that gives it a little bit of texture, a bit of interest. A little bit more Cobalt Blue next to the golden chest of the chicken. The complement will make it stand out, look more three-dimensional. It will pull it away from the grass and make it look separate rather than blended into the grass. And of course the green, the darker green, is going to be a complement to the red in the chicken that I've used. So when you're thinking about backgrounds, think about complementary colours. And I've got even more ultramarine blue for much darker shadows under the chicken. And when you're thinking about shadows, you can't do them all at once. Here I come in with the pen just to fill out a few little details. So layering is your key. You have to layer your colours, layer your darks, and then all those beautiful layers of colour. Well, in transparent watercolour, they will all show through each other and be part of your completed painting. And one of the other paintings I did, I haven't demonstrated here, but I did one of the pair of chickens too, and I did more detail in the background. But it really does help to understand how the chicken is formed, what the feathers look like, what pattern the feathers make, what direction the feathers go. And you may have seen I added a little bit of burnt sienna to the grass, just darkening up some of those areas, making a judgment that I needed a little bit more dark now that I have the grass in there. Thank you for watching.